For the Louisville Cardinals to achieve double-digit wins this regular season, many things are going to happen. Two things in particular: winning the 50-50 games and handling business on the road in conference play. We'll elaborate more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Louisville.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Card Nation, what is going on, everyone? Welcome into this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. I want to personally take this time to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. Today's episode of the show brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. We're continuing on along in our Louisville football season schedule breakdown. The three-part series continues with the second installment, discussing the next four-game slate with opponents like SMU, Virginia, Miami, and Boston College. Key storylines, brief previews, and game-by-game predictions for this slate of the schedule. The main storyline, or storylines, in the second part of the schedule, for me, in my opinion, as it relates to this four-game slate, is that Louisville needs to, A, win the 50-50 games, and B, handle business on the road in conference play. Before we elaborate, the four-game schedule chronologically looks like this. As I mentioned, this is a cumulative series. I predicted the Louisville Cardinals to go 3-1 in the first four games, the one loss coming to Notre Dame. Louisville will hypothetically bounce back from that loss with a home game on Saturday, October 5th, against SMU. These game times are TBD outside of the final one we'll talk about. They will then travel to Charlottesville to take on Virginia Saturday, October 12th, returning home Saturday, October 19th to take on number 19 Miami. And then the first and only non-Saturday game of the season, Friday, October 25th, the Cardinals will travel up to the Northeast to take on Boston College, 7:30 kickoff on ESPN2. So home away, home away. And it sort of is broken up by the home games and the away games with the two different priorities. You have to win the 50-50 games. And it will differ depending on who you talk to on which games those are going to be. I think Miami is one of the most true 50-50 games on the schedule. I do think that the Hurricanes are going to be better in 2024. Can Cristobal lead them to the playoffs? I think that's to be determined. He really hasn't been able to overachieve yet. In fact, you would suggest that he's actually underachieving. They went 7-6 last year, but we'll talk more about that in the next segment. Miami, with the talent that they brought in, is going to be as close to being a 50-50 game on the schedule as there is. I think Clemson is a potential one. Kentucky could be one. SMU also, put it this way, it seems from talking to different fans, outside or inside Louisville, seeing the way the rest of the ACC, seeing how they think SMU is going to be, what they're going to go through in their first year in the ACC, how their team is perceived this season. It feels like I'm higher on the Mustangs than most people are, if not the vast majority. I just believe in the offensive scheme. I believe in the defensive coordinator. I think Rhett Lashley is a very good head coach. Yes, there is better competition that they're going to be going up against, but at the end of the day, I do think that SMU is going to be a more formidable opponent than Louisville fans and the rest of the conference will give them credit for being. There's a very good chance that they could be 4-1 leading up to that game against Louisville. They have a matchup with Florida State the week before the Cardinals. They're probably going to lose that game, but they do play TCU, BYU, and Nevada. I think there's a very real possibility that Lashley's team is 4-1 when the Cardinals play the Mustangs on October 5th. And winning 50-50 games, like these principles apply to the entirety of the season, but they are emphasized with this 4-game slate because the situations magnify it. It magnifies the importance because Miami is viewed as a 50-50 contest. SMU, although Louisville fans don't want to admit it, I think is more of a 50-50 game, or it's as close to being a 50-50 game as it can get without maybe being one. But still, I would be shocked if Louisville is favored to beat either team by more than 10 points, especially Miami. But SMU, I don't think they're going to be favored to beat them on the spread by 10 points. So you win the 50-50 games, you put yourself in a better position to make back-to-back appearances in Charlotte at the ACC championship. And losing to Notre Dame is not the end of the world, right? Because it doesn't count as a conference loss. But if you were to lose to SMU or Miami is a conference contender. SMU, if who knows, if they split against Florida State and Louisville, obviously I think that they're going to show that they can contend and they're going to put themselves in a great position. But winning at the very least one of these two is sort of a requirement for Louisville. And I think that honestly Louisville needs to win both outside of, since they lost to Notre Dame in this hypothetical. So winning the 50-50 games is key for Louisville in the second part of the schedule. Also important, equally important, I would add, handling business on the road in conference play. That goes without saying, regardless. But if you were to ask me, and I think that I've said this on this show before, if you were to ask me, who are the two conference opponents that usually haven't been as good as Louisville, but they always give Louisville the most fits since joining the ACC back in 2014? Those two teams would be Virginia and Boston College. I mean, with Virginia is going to be one of the worst teams in the ACC again this year. But they were last year. Louisville barely beat them. Like 2014, Louisville lost on the road to Virginia. 2016, really, really tough game. Louisville almost lost on the road at Virginia. They got beaten 2017. I'm sorry, they got beaten 2018, not 2017. They got beaten 2018. They blew a double-digit lead, I believe, in 2021. And they barely beat them again in 2023. So it's really kind of challenging because you are playing on the road at Virginia. You can struggle with them at home, but on the road, it feels like they always end up giving the Cardinals fits. Like it's never convincing victories when the Cardinals travel to Charlottesville. And then you look at Boston College, and this is a really weird case study. Because either Louisville or Boston, either it's a blowout or it's an extremely close game. And I want to look at this. I want to sort of recite this history since the Cardinals joined the ACC. Louisville is 9-7 overall against Boston College. They're 5-4 in conference play against them. I want to read to you how this series has gone. 2014, Louisville won 38-19, blowout victory. 2015, they won by 3. 2016, they won by 45. 2017, they lost by 3. 2018, they lost by 18. 2019, won by 2. 2020, lost by 7. 2021, won by 14. 2022, lost by 1. 2023, won 56-28. So again, it's blowout or close game. Or at least the history would suggest that that's going to be the case. And since Louisville has joined the conference, you look at what they've done on the road. 2014 was a resounding victory. 2016 was a resounding victory, both on the road. Since then, they have, I believe, lost 3 straight appearances up in the Northeast. I think that changes this offseason. Or this season, I should say. But again, despite how good a team is going to be, sometimes conference games get challenging. And Virginia and Boston College don't have the greatest stadium atmosphere, but for whatever reason, these are just sloppy games that Louisville seems to struggle with. And that is something that they're going to have to do better on. And hopefully with a new head coach and continual tenure that they're able to sort of get out of those weird ruts when they play both of these spots on the road. So the priorities here, winning the 50-50 games and handling business on the road against conference opponents. To give a justifiable game-by-game prediction, I think we have to preview these teams like we did on the most recent episode of the show. What do these teams bring to the table? We'll break that down on the next segment of Locked On Louisville. Today's episode brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is an official ticket marketing place. It has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Like if you are finding yourself in the area, Game Time has a 50% off Labor Day offer for the Diamondbacks and Dodgers game. It's exclusive only on Game Time and on Labor Day, I should add. But Louisville football, less than 2 weeks away. Season tickets are in the highest demand that they have been in quite some time. Tickets going to be more challenging to get. That's why you have to download the Game Time app and reap the benefits of the great opportunities. They have the all-in pricing, which is a feature that you can toggle to show the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. There's the lowest price guarantee, which basically means that you will get tickets for the same section and row for less, 110% of the difference credited back if you find tickets in that same section and row for less, or same section and row for less, I should say. Sorry, I can't speak. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. And before we get into the next segment, I also want to take this time to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. You heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment. You can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. Cardinal fans, college football is back. It's not too late to catch up before the season kicks off with SEC, ACC, Big 10, Big 12. You can get it all from Locked On's stable of college experts by subscribing to the Locked On College Football Podcast. Who has a chance to make the playoff? What teams will cause chaos in their new conferences? Everything you need to know all in one place. Be sure to follow along and subscribe to the Locked On College Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. Before we get into the predictions, we got to talk about the teams. Because like I said, we don't really do much research into the opposition in the offseason, right? Especially when a certain game is weeks and weeks, maybe even months away. The first opponent on this 4-game slate is SMU. And I mentioned that I am higher on the Mustangs than almost everyone out there outside of maybe fans in Dallas. The Mustangs won the AAC in their last year in the American Athletic Conference, 11-3 under Rhett Lashley. They ended up losing to Boston College in the Fenway Bowl, dealt with some injuries. Preston Stone was great at quarterback. Went down with injury, and a backup quarterback ended up winning that conference championship against Tulane. They have a very talented skill position group. Talented running back room. Jordan Hudson projects to be the wide receiver 1. And then you have RJ Maryland, who is one of the better tight ends in the conference. They do deal with an issue that Louisville is currently going through, and that's they lost 3 offensive line starters. So they have to replace the starters up front, but they brought some players in via the trenches. Scott Simons, defensive coordinator that could have gone elsewhere for a head coaching job, decided to come back and be the leader of the defense. He led a Mustangs defense that was top 15 in yards per game allowed. They return Elijah Roberts on the defensive line, Alexander Kilgore in the linebacking room. This is a very interesting opponent because the offense can be fantastic, high octane. They score a lot of points. It's fun to watch. It's sort of West Coasty, which without being fully West Coasty, if that makes sense. And it's a stingy defense. Will they be able to translate that impact over to the ACC? That is to be determined, but I do think that they have the personnel to do so. Virginia, like I mentioned, one of the worst teams in the conference. Last year they were 3-9. That's what makes the 31-24 win for Louisville that much more cringeworthy. So, yeah, it took you to the very end of the game to beat this team. A lot of that was in part due to the heroics of Anthony Calandria. They returned Calandria, now a sophomore, kind of got thrown into the fire, and or that wasn't really going to be a great analogy. I was going to say thrown into the fire and had to sink or swim. Thrown into the deep end and had to sink or swim. But overall, Calandria made plays with his legs. He had a great wide receiving core. Saw some movement in that room. But they returned both Calandria and Tony Muskett at quarterback. Going to be interesting to see where Virginia goes at the quarterback spot. They returned 4 starting offensive linemen. Kobe Pace and Xavier Brown will be the 1-2 punch in the backfield. Main thing for their offense, no Malik Washington. He is off to the NFL, but they brought in some key guys like Chris Tyree from Notre Dame, Andre Green from North Carolina, and some other key guys. Main thing for them, defense. 33.8 points per game allowed. Worst defense in the ACC, one of the worst in the entire conference. So I think the offense is going to improve. Defense, it's like a wait-and-see approach because they were historically bad in 2023. And then we get to Miami. I don't know what in the world to believe with the Hurricanes. On one hand, Mario Cristobal has not been able to unlock the full potential of this program. There's the narrative that he doesn't really do well with star quarterbacks. He holds his offenses back and just underachieves. Hurricanes were 7-6 last season. Lost in the Pinstripe Bowl. They lost to Louisville at the end of the year. But on the other hand, that team is so talented. It's led by Cam Ward from Washington State. He was fantastic last season, one of the best transfer portal quarterbacks out there. And they ended up going to Miami, had 8 rushing touchdowns as well. He's going to lead a really talented offense. The offensive line has 2 all-conference, all-American potential tackles. Damian Martinez from Oregon State, a 1,000-yard rusher, joins the mix. They lost Don Chaney Jr. and some other guys in that room, but solid rushing attack. They return probably overall the best wide receiving core in the conference. Xavier Restrepo, Jacoby George, and some other guys. It's a really, really potent wide receiving room. Offensively, there is zero, and I mean zero reason why Miami shouldn't have top 2, top 3 offense in the league. They're really, really good. Defensively, Ruben Bain could end up being the dark horse for Defensive Player of the Year outside of Ashton Gelati. Tyler Barron is with Miami. He went to Tennessee, to Mississippi, to Louisville, to Miami in like the span of 3 months. Francisco, I think it's Muigoa. If I'm pronouncing that wrong, please forgive me. It's Mauigoa, Mauigoa, potentially. He had 18 tackles for loss last year. 7.5 sacks, led the Hurricanes, decided to come back for another season. That defense is going to be really good as well. So overall, on paper, you could argue this is a top 10 team. Unfortunately, the games are not played on paper. They are played on the field where coaching decisions are made. Miami has done less with more for quite some time. And hopefully for the Louisville Cardinals' sake, that trend does not switch this year. So Miami's going to be really solid. And then the final opponent is Boston College. They were 7-6 last year, won the Fenway Bowl against SMU. Really weird. Jeff Hafley left Boston College to become a coordinator. And Bill O'Brien decided to come back to college, won a national title on staff at Alabama. Obviously, he's known for what he did at Penn State. Didn't really work out well in Houston. He was good as a coach, but not really good as a GM. And then I don't care what you say, the personnel that the Patriots put out there, no offense coordinators helping them succeed. So he's back in college. And he doesn't have to go far geographically to do so. He returns a very interesting quarterback, Thomas Castellanos, dual threat guy that Louisville really contained last year, but he caught lightning in a bottle certain games of the year. So you return a quarterback that has a really, really solid skill set. Kai Robichaux, Trayshawn Ward will be the two running backs in that tandem. Kamari Morales, the all-time leading touchdown receiver at tight end for North Carolina, transferred in, just sort of a revolving door as it relates to the skill guys. Offensively, they should be respectable. It's going to be a matter of protecting the quarterback. No Christian Mahogany on the interior. So to be determined there. One of the worst defenses nationally. Defensive back, revolving door. You have some interesting options at pass rusher. Donovan Ezaraku, really, really solid player. One of the best defenders in the conference. And then Nito Akpala is also in that department of rushing the passer. The team should improve. I think that they're going to still maybe even get close to bowl eligibility, depending on, I'm not really even sure who Boston College has on the schedule, if I'm being completely honest. Going through that real quick, I mean, North Carolina, Louisville, Florida State, Missouri, I guess it depends, but I guess there still is opportunity. So very interesting opponents that Louisville will go up against. What's the record? What's the prediction? We'll dive in on the final segment of the Wednesday edition of Locked On Louisville. Today's episode of the show also brought to you by Ibata. Are you taking that dream vacation this fall or winter but dreading the cost? Well, with Ibata, you get cash back on all your purchases, so you can spend more time making memories over the next couple of months and less time dreaming about them. Ibata is a free app that lets you earn cash back every time you shop. Earn on hundreds of items from groceries, beauty supplies, even toys. You can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. Right now, Ibata is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibata by using the code LOCKEDONCollege when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibata app to start earning cash back and use the code LOCKEDONCollege. If you don't know how to spell that, that's Ibata, Ibotta, in the Google Play or App Store, and use the code Locked On College. And into the final segment of this Wednesday edition of the show. Thanks again for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, Locked On Louisville, free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. Prediction time. Like I said, 3-1 from the last hypothetical, the first 4 games of the schedule. What's going to happen? Well, SMU, going to be a more challenging game than I think people want to believe. I do think that Louisville ultimately bounces back. They return home October 5th after playing against Notre Dame, and I think that they're going to be focused and ready to really bounce back. Just like they did when they lost to Pittsburgh. They beat Duke. They blanked Duke. So I think that they're going to have a great opportunity to get the momentum back. And I think that they're going to do so. This could end up being a high-scoring game, but I do think Louisville comes out on top. They'll travel to Virginia the next week. Ultimately, God, I'll be honest, this is like the Power 5 game that I look at, and I'm like, okay, which road game will most likely end up in a blowout? I think it's honestly Stanford, closely followed by Virginia. I think the Cardinals defeat the Cavaliers. It's going to be a situation where if Louisville doesn't make mistakes that hurt themselves, they're going to win this game, and they're going to win it. They're going to win it pretty convincingly. So if you handle business, you don't turn the ball over enough, or you don't turn the ball over a good amount, and you don't give Virginia short field position, I'm not sure that the defense can hold Louisville enough, and I'm not sure that offense is going to be able to go score for score with the Cardinals. So we start out 2-0 in this hypothetical. Then it comes to Miami, which is one of the more hyped up matchups of the season. It's the one that's circled on perhaps top 3 of the schedule. I mentioned there was a game that I went back and forth on with the Notre Dame loss and another team that I was factoring in a loss. And for the longest, I flip-flopped it. I had Miami being a loss and Notre Dame being a win. I've thus switched that. Notre Dame's a loss by default. Miami ends up being a win. Yes, really talented team. Thankfully, Louisville has this game at home. It could very well end up being a night game if both teams are ranked. Until I'm really in the camp of until Mario Cristobal shows that he can achieve results and expectations with the level of talent that he's added to the program, it's really hard to put all of the eggs in the Hurricanes basket. So for the time being, I'm going to consider this game a win. I think that the defenses are going to be extremely comparable. It's going to be a matter of which offense can create the big-time plays. I think both of them can. However, what gives Louisville the edge for me is that this is a home game, and you hope that that gives the team some sort of advantage. The last game is Boston College, one that is a really, really weird matchup because of the history between the two teams since the team has joined the ACC. I think Louisville wins this one. It's a Friday night game. Has all the makings for being one of those weird fluke trap, you shouldn't have lost this game type vibes. But I think Louisville has the blueprint to be able to contain Thomas Castellanos. I think the defense is still going to be trying to improve, and there's a revolving door at offensive line. And with the skill positions, I think that this might be closer than comfortable. I think that this could end up being painfully close just because of the situation. But at the end of the day, I'm going to give the Cardinals the victory. And truthfully, a win is a win. We recited that mantra a couple times last year. A win is a win. Louisville, in this hypothetical, is now sitting at 7-1. They will have won 4 straight games in this series going into the final stretch of the season with Clemson, Stanford, Pittsburgh, and Kentucky. 3 road games and 1 home game in the month of November. And we'll break that down on the next episode of the show. Before we get out of here, I do want to give you a little bit of insight on how game week, the first game week of the season, hallelujah, football is almost a week away. What's the content going to be like? I'm hoping to have a guest on to do the preview. We're going to do a little bit of Austin Peay preview. I'm not sure really how much because this is a game that Louisville should win pretty handily. So we'll talk X factors. We'll talk players to watch. We'll talk about what we're hoping to see from the team. Potentially some games to focus on in the ACC that week. And also maybe have a basketball recruiting episode of the show because more and more visits are being announced. But that is going to wrap up this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Everyone have a great day. We'll see you right back here